The mysterious old woman. It was late, the sun was starting to set. I had to deliver my load by 7 in the evening before the warehouse closed, and it was already past 6. The Rumorosa highway had always seemed monotonous and boring to me. If it weren't for the music on the stereo, I would have fallen asleep hours ago in one of the many curves on that road. Suddenly, I saw a dark figure in the distance. As I got closer, I noticed that it was an old woman, and she seemed to be asking for a ride. In a split second, you can think and feel many things, and the first thing I thought was that I couldn't just stop there, since it was a curve. What if a car came behind me and crashed into me? I could stop later, where there was room to pull over. But she was an old woman. If I stopped, I decided I would do it a little further ahead, about 300 meters. It would take her an eternity to reach me. I was thinking about all of this when I realized that if I was going to stop, I didn't have much time to think. I looked in my mirror and didn't see any lights in the distance, so I said to myself, whatever God wants. I eased off the accelerator and started to slow down. But as I was doing it, the most important question came to me. What the hell was an old woman doing in the middle of nowhere? Even though I looked, I didn't see any crashed or stopped cars, only the possibility of a car falling off the cliff. But why wouldn't she have gone down with her car? Maybe she lived out there. It was the only solution I could think of, even though I hadn't seen any houses in any of the times I had been there. But I couldn't know if behind the rocks that covered the panorama, in the whole curve, there was a house and a secret path that I had never seen. I finally stopped right next to the old woman. I reached over to open the door, and when I did, I found myself face to face with the most pale and wrinkled face I had ever seen. But the strangest thing was that she had black glasses and a black bow that covered her head. You're going fast. We're on the curve. A car could come and crash, I said, noticing she hadn't moved. But the old woman didn't say anything. She didn't even look at me. She slowly raised her arm to grab the frame of the door. She lifted her foot slowly. When she did that, I could see her knee rise from the ground until it almost touched her face, without her head moving a single centimeter. That kind of flexibility was incredible. She rose like a cat and crouched as she entered the seat. Suddenly, she raised her head and looked at me with a macabre smile, but without showing me her teeth, and said to me in a raspy voice, "Thank you." Then she sat down in the chair, looking straight ahead. I looked at her terrified until the sudden sound of a horn at high speed snapped me out of my stupor. A car passed by, speeding past us. "We can go now," the old woman said to me. I put the trailer in gear and started to move slowly, gradually picking up speed. I couldn't stand the terror I felt for that old woman who was just a few centimeters away from me. Her smell was strange, not exactly unpleasant, but something I had never smelled before. I didn't want to talk to her, I didn't want to turn around to see her. It scared me. I could see in my own eyes how the old woman looked at me, and I could see how her head started to turn at an impossible angle until her glasses pointed directly at me, and she stayed like that for a few minutes, and then looked back at the front. She did it at least 3 times on the way, and suddenly she spoke to me after almost 20 minutes of silence. "You're scared, aren't you?" "Yes, you're scared. I can feel it because you are sweating. You shouldn't fear an old woman. We don't usually hurt anyone. In fact, we can hardly move. How are we going to hurt you?" "No, ma'am," I answered, trying to sound brave. "It's just that I'm tired from the trip. I've been driving for a lot of hours, don't lie to me." "You're afraid of me. I know how to notice those things. I've been asking for a ride on this road for many years, and I know who's afraid of me and who's not. Most of them are afraid of me. Those who talk a lot are the most noticeable, but the quiet ones are also afraid of me." "I'm going to change the subject," I said. "Do you live around here?" "You could say yes," she answered without taking her eyes off the road. "And where is your house?" "You don't need a house to live in a place." "Then, where do you live?" "You already said it." I live around here. Her answer left me more intrigued than I already was, and with many more doubts. I'm almost there. Thank you very much for the ride. And where do you want to get out? I asked her. She pointed with her finger to a side of the road, where there was one of the many abandoned cars. I released the accelerator and started to step on the brake while I wondered what was going to happen in that place in the middle of nowhere and at night to an old woman like her. I stopped about 20 meters from the place she pointed to, and when I looked in the mirror to see if no one was coming, and when I turned to help the old woman open the door, she was no longer there. I quickly got out to see if she had not fallen, but there was no trace of her anywhere. Out of curiosity, I approached that abandoned car to see if she was there. At this point, I began to think that perhaps she was not an old woman, but a thief dressed as an old woman. No old woman can get off a trailer so quickly. So I approached that car very carefully, but I didn't find any old woman, nor any thief. But what I did find were some broken black glasses and a very old black bow stained with blood. I immediately got back in my trailer and left. Every time I pass by, I'm afraid to meet that old woman again. Something got on the trailer. My brother and I were truck drivers, and we always remember a chilling experience that occurred to us in a section of Rumorosa. We were driving at dawn, going through a place where there was a hill. As we were passing through that place, we felt something fall on top of the trailer box from above that hill. We got scared because we thought stones had fallen on top of the box because we heard a very strong blow, and it felt like we were carrying a very heavy load. But then, we began to hear movement on top of us. It began to move, we heard footsteps advancing and walking through the box, and our truck started moving from one side to the other. We were very scared, and without knowing what the hell that could have been, we looked through the mirrors and what we saw was something very creepy. It was a black shadow that advanced on one side of the trailer box, and we didn't understand how it could have gotten there. That wasn't an animal. That thing was slowly advancing towards us. We were so terrified that we couldn't even pray. Then, my brother saw a bush emerging from a hill, and what he did, out of pure adrenaline, was to hit it as hard as he could. By doing this, he managed to knock that thing off the trailer. In that instant, we felt the heavy load release. We accelerated, moving away from that place. When we reached our destination, we told everyone what had happened to us. On that day, we looked at the box on the side where that entity was advancing, and we could see marks of claws, like fangs, and later, near the cabin, there were some holes, and it looked like the sheet metal was melted. After that macabre experience, we gave up that job. It almost cost us our lives, and if it wasn't for my brother managing to knock that thing down, who knows what would have happened. We still feel afraid when we think about that terrifying experience that happened to us that night when we were passing through Rumorosa. A specter in the viewpoint. I have a story that every time I tell it, my skin crawls. If you believe me, fine. If not, well, everyone has their own point of view. But I assure you it's real. I think only those to whom something strange has happened in Rumorosa will understand me. I had gone with my friend to Rosarito, and it was an excellent trip. We passed through Tijuana, and then we would go to a place called El Hongo, where we would stay with a friend in his house. But when we got to this place, this friend had a fight with one of his family members. So I told my friend that we should go back to Mexicali. He agreed, and we restarted our trip without imagining that that night we would see something strange. When we were passing by Rumorosa, at 2 in the morning, after passing the toll booth, I needed to smoke a cigarette, and as I knew that my friend didn't let anyone smoke in his car, I asked him if we could stop at one of the viewpoints of Rumorosa. When we got there, everything was deserted. My friend was parking when at that moment, I heard a scream that seemed to come from somewhere in the darkness. I still haven't been able to forget that scream, but that wouldn't be the only weird thing I witnessed that night. When I looked at one of the benches that were there, I saw something that made me feel a huge terror. There was a white figure of a person sitting looking at us. I remember that at that moment he was all alone, so what was that person doing all white, sitting there at that time, looking at us? Suddenly, my friend turned the wheel without me having said anything, and he took the road again. I was a little doubtful about what I had seen, and a few minutes later, still descending through La Rumorosa, I commented to him, wanting to check if he had seen the same as me. I asked him why he hadn't stopped for me to smoke, and he said to me that I could smoke all I wanted inside the car, but he wasn't going to stop anywhere on the road for any reason. Later, when passing through the salt lagoon, he told me, "Did you hear and see what I saw?" I answered yes, but I wanted him to prove to me that what he had seen was real. To this day, we continue to talk about that anecdote, and we believe that that white figure that we looked at could have been the ghost of someone who died falling off the cliff and crashing against the stones, but it would only be one of the hundreds who have died in that place of La Rumorosa. Was she a nurse? I'm 40 years old. I started this job when I was 16, accompanying my father on his trips, and I became very fond of this profession, so much so that I ended up dedicating myself to it. Throughout my years, I've had several experiences, and this time, I'll tell you the most recent. I had to make a trip to Tijuana, and on the way, I had to go through La Rumorosa. Despite what is said about this road, nothing had ever happened to me. I mean, the times I got to go through there, it wasn't that late. But on this occasion, which was in January 2020, I left the base late. So much so that when I passed through La Rumorosa, it was already past 1 in the morning. The road was very quiet, until everything turned strange when in the distance I saw a woman standing on the side of the road. I noticed that she was dressed all in white and wearing a sweater. I thought she was part of the people who dedicate themselves to robbing on the roads, and for obvious reasons, I didn't stop and continued on my way. I was almost sure that they wanted to rob me. When I arrived at the town, I stopped in a store and bought several things to eat on the way. While I was grabbing those things that I was going to buy, the cashier told me, "Listen, your wife is over there by the trailer." I was surprised and told him that I didn't come with anyone, but when I looked at my truck, I clearly saw a thin arm coming out of the co-pilot's window. At that moment I told the cashier, "No way, someone got in my trailer. I'll be right back." I ran to my trailer, but when I got there, there was no one. Then I checked my cabin, and nothing. I was alone in the trailer. I even surrounded it because I thought they had gone down and hidden to the side. But no, there was no one. I returned and asked the cashier if he saw if someone had gone down, but he said no. We stayed at the door looking at the trailer for a few minutes. I think he and I already knew what had happened. A little dead one must have gotten in. "I clearly saw someone inside your trailer," the cashier told me. We talked for a while, and he commented that people often come telling stories of having seen things on the road, but that he had never seen anything like that until that day. After paying him, I said goodbye, and before going up, I thought, whatever God wills. I went up and checked the cabin again, and I was completely alone. I was somewhat tired, but since I was almost there to reach my destination, I decided to follow my way, but I stayed thinking about it. I hadn't gone far when I turned to look in my mirror, and when I did, I realized that someone was coming in my truck. I swear I felt my body get cold from the fear. I was almost sure it was a little dead one. I still followed my path and didn't want to turn around, but from what little I saw, I thought I had noticed that it was the nurse. In those towns, a lot is said of the legend of a nurse who they say was good, but that she was lost in the desert of La Rumorosa, and they didn't know anything about her, and that her body was wandering around there. When I got to my destination, I didn't see her anymore. But I hope it was that famous nurse, and not something else.